today's programme is all about pulses, or dried vegetables. And they're quite extraordinary because if you're eating a balanced diet anyway, if you're eating enough dairy foods and cereals, pulses can provide you with the same amount of protein as meat at a fraction of the cost. And I think for this reason they're going to play a very important part in our diet in the future, because meat's becoming more expensive and also becoming much more scarce. And we can take a tip from some of the poorer countries of the world who do really delicious recipes with pulses. Well, first of all, I'd like to run through a few pulses with you. I've got a few samples here. Of course, there are hundreds of varieties, but I'd like to show you one or two to start off with. First of all, chickpeas. These are sometimes called garbanzos, and these are what are used in Greek cooking, sometimes in salads, and sometimes made into a puree, which is called hummus. Next door, we've got an old-fashioned English pulse, and that's dried peas, and these are the sort that you use when you make old-fashioned peas pudding, which is served with a nice boiled bacon joint. Now, next door to dried peas, I've got split peas, and they're in fact the same as dried peas, only they've been what I call filleted. The skins have been taken off. Now, there's two sorts, golden, split peas, and green, and I've found in my experiments that the green ones, in fact, I think have a slightly better flavour than the yellow ones. Then we move on to something which, to me, seems a sort of cross between a pea and a bean, and that's aduki beans. They're very small, tiny, they have a nutty flavour, and they're nice cooked with rice, either as a salad or as a hot dish. Now we're moving on to one of my favourites, and these are whole lentils. Sometimes they're called green lentils, sometimes brown. I call them green and brown because that's what they are. And they're whole lentils. And really they have an awful lot of really delicious flavour, much better than these next door, which are the, again, filleted lentils. These are the ones with the skins taken off and just the insides. And I promise you, these have only about 50% of the flavour of the whole ones. So I'd always use the whole ones in preference. Now we move into another one, which is not one of my favourites. These are haricot beans, but the small haricot beans, the small round ones, these are of baked bean fame, and although they're just as nutritious, they're not half as good in flavour as these next door, which are the long haricot beans. I've still got lentils on my fingers there, but what I'm showing you now is the length of these beans, which are what the French use in dishes like cassoulet and the Italians as well. And they're a much better bargain flavour-wise. Now next door I've got butter beans here. These we're more familiar with. They're despised in some circles, but I think they're quite good. They cook up to a nice floury consistency. They make a creamy soup. And the only thing is, if they're a bit on the dryish side, you need some sauce or something to soak into them. Well, then further along here I've got a first cousin of the long white bean, and that's red kidney beans, sometimes called navy beans. These are a lovely, pretty red colour. They taste very good, and they make up what's one of my husband's absolutely favourite dishes, and mine too, and that's chili con carne. And we're going to be cooking with those in a moment. But first of all, I want to give you a word about storing dried vegetables, dried pulses, because people think because they're dried, they're just going to last forever. And I'm afraid that isn't true. They start coming into the shops, they're dried, harvested, dried, and they arrive here around about December. And then I think the shelf life is a year. After that, they get very tough, and if you've had them 3 years, you'll have to cook them 3 years before they'll ever get soft again. So a word about storage. When you buy them from the shop with a large turnover, and store them in a jar with a label on saying when you got them, and then you won't have any trouble in cooking them.